On this episode of Search with Candour, I'm talking all about storytelling in marketing with Amy Doherty from Fidelity Fulfillment. We're going to talk about SEO, we're going to talk about content marketing, we're going to talk about marketing in general and everything to do with storytelling and how it can help you be a better marketer in 2024. Hello and welcome to episode 11 of season 3 of the Search with Candour podcast. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward. Thank you so much for joining me if you're watching on YouTube or Spotify, or if you're listening on your podcast app of choice. I won't judge you if you don't want to watch. I'm just sat here in the Candour studio. I tend to kind of blend my podcast experience these days. Some I watch on YouTube and Spotify, some I listen to on podcast apps. It's entirely up to you, but I appreciate whether you're watching or listening. I appreciate the support for season 3 of Search with Candour. This week, I am joined by the fantastic Amy Doherty, and we're talking all about storytelling in marketing and how it can be a really, really powerful tool to communicate with your audience, to communicate with your colleagues, to communicate with clients. It's all about the power of communication and how stories and storytelling really kind of set the foundation for a lot of what we do in marketing, let alone what we do in SEO. It's a big topic, it's a big conversation, something I'm very passionate about as a bit of a wannabe writer myself and that kind of thing. And I know Amy is very, very passionate and knowledgeable about it as well throughout her career. So look forward to that after a word from our sponsors for this week, Optmyzr and AlsoAsked. This week's sponsor is Optmyzr, the PPC management software that is built for PPC people. Optmyzr contains everything you need to create, optimize, and justify high-performing PPC campaigns. You'll never have to worry about security again. You'll never have to worry about setting up complex data sharing between apps or juggling multiple invoices. With their dashboard, you get a high-level overview of any ad account connected to Optmyzr. You can quickly see key metrics, recommended actions, and how to set up the next campaign all in one place. The rule builder uses easy drag and drop conditions to automatically take action when you need them to. And this is a real experience from my previous role where we had an ad that ran throughout the holiday period when it shouldn't have been, and I think it spent nearly 6 times its recommended budget by accident. If I had an Optmyzr at that time, it would have paused the campaign automatically when it hit its budget, and we would have saved a lot of trouble and a lot of money for our client. You also get automated alerts for things such as KPI metrics and budgets in general. Optmyzr monitors what you specify and delivers alerts to you so you can intervene as needed. Optmyzr also integrates with other apps such as Slack, Teams, and Zapier, so if you need to get alerts where you need them, you can do that by integrating Optmyzr with those tools as well. The Optmyzr team includes world-renowned experts such as CEO Fred Valles, product evangelist Nava Hopkins, and of course the PPC puppy HK. Now, we've spoken about this topic on the podcast before, so you probably already know that ad platforms are pretty much driven by profit motive and benefit when you spend more, even if it's not in your best interest to do so, and it's on lower value traffic. Advertisers need to put their interests and those of their brands and clients first, so the idea of PPC insurance is taking out a policy, essentially by using software like Optmyzr, that covers you when things go south. With everything you need for audits and reporting, Optmyzr is the all-in-one PPC toolkit that makes managing paid search easier, faster, and less prone to error. To start your 2-week free trial, click the link in the show notes or the video description down below, or go to optmyzr.com. That's a 2-week free trial by clicking the link in our show notes or in the video description down below if you're watching on YouTube. You can go to AlsoAsked.com and check out this fantastic and unique intent research tool. As we probably already know, search intent is at the core of everything we do as SEOs. Even if you're not directly working in content, understanding what your users are trying to achieve through their searches is still pretty important. I think we can all agree. On top of this, Google has told us that it takes up to 9 searches for users to complete their goals. This can be a pretty hard picture to capture, to be honest, with traditional keyword research tools. So what if you could get hold of up-to-the-minute questions that users have asked that have been clustered by intent by Google themselves? Well, that's exactly what AlsoAsked actually does. AlsoAsked mines and organizes Google's People Also Ask data in real time, showing you the next most likely question your searchers are going to ask. Best of all, it's completely free. You don't even need to create an account to try out AlsoAsked. Of course, if you do find it useful, there are paid options as well. We have the free, we have the light, and we have the pro options in terms of accounts that you can subscribe to. At the touch of a button from these accounts, you can download not only the questions people are asking, but also the answers Google has selected, the website URLs, and the titles that are ranking for those answers as well. AlsoAsked has the world's only API for People Also Ask data, meaning you can combine this data you're pulling from whatever questions you're asking directly into tools. You can combine it with things like ChatGPT to really supercharge your content briefs and transform the way you write content at scale. Go to alsoasked.com and check out this fantastic intent research tool today. My guest for this week is the marketing manager at Fidelity. Welcome to the show, Amy Doherty.
Hi, Jack.
Welcome to the show. It's nice to have you on. I know we've chatted a couple of times on Slack and a couple of bits on LinkedIn and stuff like that. It's lovely to finally actually sit down and have a conversation. I feel like I've seen your little face floating around on social media and stuff for a little while now.
I'm just popping around.
It's nice to actually sit down and have a conversation. And as a fellow writer turned SEO, I am very excited about our topic today because we're going to talk about storytelling. And I know that sounds like an incredibly broad topic, listeners and viewers. It's going to be a broad topic. I think there's a lot of different ways it can apply to marketing and SEO and all this kind of stuff. But I guess I want to start off with, what was your thought process behind bringing that as a topic to the podcast and why you wanted to talk about it?
I think there's two real reasons. The one is that I see it done really well, and the other is that I see it done really badly. And I think a lot of it comes down to, if you're not used to working with sort of the narrative medium, if you're not used to doing storytelling in some way, it's very easy to get bogged down in the more SEO, the more technical side, or the more tick boxing side, and forget essentially the point of what you're doing. And another is just this really big passion of mine. I think it's really, where I come from, the creative side, that kind of background. So it's what I know. And it's just good fun to talk about, really.
Yeah. So I mentioned you're currently the marketing manager at Fidelity Fulfillment, but what is your kind of journey through being a writer? Where does that origin story come from?
Oh gosh. So it was, my focus at uni was creative writing.
Okay. That's a good start.
Which was obviously where it all started from. And then I actually got into marketing through one of the weird routes that people take, is I used to do design work. So I used to do graphic design coupled with some copy, and then sort of went on from there. And the way it tends to go in marketing is it snowballs, and you have to learn this and you have to learn that. And then eventually you've got the skill set that you need, but you don't know how you got there. So that was kind of how I got into marketing in the first place, was that side of things. So, yeah.
It's an interesting combination, like with the design and the writing side of things. I think that's a lot of people will come from one or the other, but the combination is an interesting one, coming from that creative style. And I think you're totally right. So many people, especially early on in their careers, fall into the checklist style SEO stuff, just sticking with the really analytical stuff and not really thinking about I don't want to go very philosophical with like the opening 3 minutes of the show, but like the whole point of marketing and stuff is telling stories and the whole psychological thing behind it, right? And I think that's something, because we often kind of silo ourselves off as like, oh, it's SEO, it's a separate little thing.
It's its own thing, yeah.
And I understand that so many people kind of do have, my previous role was SEO specialist. I didn't touch the PPC stuff. I don't touch the design stuff. There's elements of that as well. But my background is more overall marketing and writing and stuff. I can't design and draw to save my life, so I don't have that in common with you at all. But yeah, I think coming from the writing side and having the idea that like humans have always told stories, right? I know we're, like I said, making it very big and philosophical and taking it back to human history.
But it's a shortcut in a conversation. It's the way that stories are told, the way that we use them. And again, this is a really big interest of mine. I'm quite interested in things like folk tales and fairy tales, for example. because they're a great way we've always used of telling a message, and every culture has their own, and there's similarities even from different parts of the world. There's still similarities in the stories that we tell, and it just becomes a quick way of getting a message across. And it's something like cliches and tropes, although we don't like them, they serve a purpose. They tell it really quickly, they get to the point quickly, and people know what you mean when you use them. So storytelling and those kind of messages that we're used to hearing just cut through the drivel and get to the point in a quick way that we can all recognize.
Yeah, I think it's something a lot of marketers have said over the years. I know it's something Rory Sutherland has said, like that initial get an emotional reaction from somebody, right?
Yeah.
That those initial few seconds from whether it's your ad copy or your video placement or the latest article you've written, whatever it is, that emotional moment. And you said, like you said there, having it be relatable to the audience is
Yeah.
such a powerful tool, rather than like, the hell is this? What am I even watching? What am I even looking at? Having that initial thing where, oh, I recognize this,
Yeah.
like you said, this cliche, this trope, this established way of communicating. Do you think that's kind of a thing a lot of people are forgetting these days? Have you seen that kind of common across advertising and marketing around 2024?
I do. And I think it's one of the things a lot of people are scared of, even people who come, maybe even especially people who come from a creative writing or that kind of background, kind of forget the idea that actually there's a reason a cliche is a cliche. There's a reason a call to action. There's a reason a call to action of buy now is a good call to action, because it's nice and simple. People know what they're looking at. People know what they're doing. You can make it creative and say experience the difference or something like that, but you have to make sure your audience knows what you're asking them to do. And sometimes people can get a little bit lost and maybe try to be too clever or too complicated. And you lose that kind of immediate impact of actually you're talking to a person. You're talking to somebody who you have a problem to solve for them. And whether that's with a service or a product or advice, you're solving a problem. Find out how to communicate with them in a way that they trust you. And if you get too wordy with it, or if you get too detached with it, you're going to lose that connection.
Yeah, I love that idea of like that the simple CTA works so much, and I've been totally guilty of this in the past, where
I do.
having a big like branded catchphrase or whatever that's like, feel the experience and difference from this blah 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 product. It's like, actually what we mean is buy product now. Like, oh, that actually gets a higher click-through rate. And it's even things like anchor text, right? When you're thinking about process of internal linking and external linking and stuff, and even like the getting into slightly more technical side of SEO there, the language we use, I think, is still so important. And whether that's an accessibility side of things, or whether that's literally just telling the user, if they click on this thing, what are they actually doing? Like a read more button or a click here button or whatever. I know those are the two bad examples everybody brings up, but that doesn't tell you anything, right? That's a bad example. Whereas buy now or find out more information about this product, or if you want to subscribe here or whatever, since we're on YouTube and Spotify and all that kind of stuff, that's on my brain. Like the subscribe button is there for a reason, right? And I think you're totally right. Having that simple, clear way of communicating is something we often kind of lose sight of a lot of the time. We get bogged down into trying to push the brand message or push this thing or say a particular thing that is best for the company, but actually what is best for users might be the most simple, straightforward, obvious thing you can think of.
I think it's one of those things that a lot of people are guilty of, is getting bogged down in the brand story, when actually the thing you're telling right now is the customer story. So it's making sure you differentiate between those, because there is absolutely a place for your brand story. Definitely. And it's if it's a good story, or if you tell it well, then it's really impactful and it helps the rest of your messaging. But realistically, what are you using the brand story for? Is it helping you at this point, or should you perhaps focus on the user and their journey and where they are and what problems they're having, rather than making it too brandy and too, it's not to stifle creativity and say everything should sound the same, because that would be horrendous, but just making sure that you've got them at top of mind if that's what you need to be writing.
I think that's the other side of the coin, right? There is that element where you need to understand the tone of voice and the right places to be creative and bring that element of emotion and connection to the audiences and stuff like that. there is an element for me of, I always think about it, I'm a bit too, I don't know, like a bit too writery about it sometimes, and want to say it in the nicest way possible. I feel like by now, as much as it really does work
Is
and is basically proven to
it's
work,
a bit,
feels a bit like, yeah, direct to
yeah.
me. And maybe I'm a bit of a softie and I should be a bit more direct in my marketing. But I always find
But
that for
this
me,
is the
I
thing.
tend to lean towards the like, please buy now, please subscribe, please buy now
Yeah.
kind of thing.
But this is where the analytical and the research side of things comes into it, because it may well be that the audience responds better to that. And that, in fact, buy now is too aggressive for your user, or subscribe here is a bit too much, and maybe they need to be led into that in a different way. So there's no one answer fits all. If there was, it would be so much easier. But there's no one size fits all when it comes to your messaging and what works, because it comes down to that user research, that demographics, that what's the competitors are doing well or badly, all of that background stuff, so that you can then begin to craft your essentially strategy, and build your writing from there.
Yeah, I think that building your own brand, or working with the company you're working in, and their brand as well, I think is a key part of understanding where to push your limits and be creative, and where to kind of like rein yourself in a bit more, right? And I think
Yeah.
that is definitely something we all have to learn in our marketing careers.
Oh
Eventually
yeah.
you'll get to a point where somebody, possibly me or someone else, has pushed the envelope a little bit too much. They're like, actually, no, let's wind back
That's a bit,
down a bit.
yeah,
Or
let's pull that
yeah.
in.
And I think you're totally
Yeah.
right, like catering it to a specific audience, because as much as we're going to be giving advice and talking about the options and like the benefits and the advantages and all that kind of stuff of storytelling in marketing and SEO, it's never going to be, exactly as you said, a one size fits all thing, right? You need to understand sometimes the emotional thing is maybe not the right thing to go for, or a different emotion. Invoking anger. I don't know if you've seen any basically TikTok or YouTube thumbnail over the last decade, getting angry
But
clicks,
yeah.
and all the podcast stuff that's happening at the moment with people like Stephen Bartlett and Joe Rogan getting these controversial figures on the podcast on purpose,
Yeah.
creating purposefully controversial content to get clicks. That's
Yeah.
still emotions. You're still connecting with the audience. It's not a positive emotion, but you might just hate watch it or hate read it or whatever it is as well.
Which, yeah, any publicity and all that. But
Yeah, exactly.
it's
Exactly.
oh yeah, but yeah, no, it's one of those interesting things, because there are definite do's and don'ts, as we know, but like you say, it's not one of those things that you can say this is definitely going to work. I've worked for charities, for example, where the messaging and the tone and the story is very, very emotional, very one-on-one connection. And then if you work in B2B, it's slightly different, because you still have to connect with that person, that decision maker, but in a very different way. And a lot of your story comes down to things like testimonials, or other people in their situation, putting themselves in their shoes. And it's just very, very different way of doing it. But both of those rely on keeping their attention and being part of that journey that they're going on, and putting your solution or your product, or in the case of charities, the support that you provide, in the right place at the right time for them.
Yeah, I think telling that story part of it is such a way to relate to somebody. You can take somebody on an entire journey in a single article or a video or a podcast episode or whatever it is, and understanding how that is, as we said at the top of the episode, like such a core part of human communication. We've been
Yeah.
telling stories for tens of thousands of years, well
Yeah.
before the internet was a thing, well before electricity was being used by us, like all this kind of stuff. It's so almost like ingrained in our beings as human
Yeah.
beings, to use a weird phrase of beings of human beings. But I think that's the element of relatability of, I find, and this was my straight away my initial thought when you brought the subject up as a topic for the podcast, was like how certain articles are structured, or certain YouTube videos or different types of content that we create throughout the years, is like, when it tells a story, I find it much more easy to understand it as a structure, right? Structuring
Yeah.
something as a story of, and I know some people are very frustrated with the recipe thing of like, back in 1856, my great great grandmother invented this pie, and here I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you the recipe of this pie. There's do's and don'ts. There's pros and cons here, but for me, that was my initial thought, was like, how the structure of storytelling can help us communicate what would otherwise be a standard, normal piece of content, can transform it into something really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, the example I tend to use is, say, for example, me, myself, a person, was shopping for new shoes for my kid. And the journey that I go on is my son comes home from school and he's completely trashed his school shoes. They're completely ruined. And I'm like, I'm done with this brand. They're not working. I need something new. So I'm starting right at the top. I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't want. I know what I'm looking for, but I don't know the brand. I don't know the solution. I don't know if there is a solution. So I'm right at the top of essentially the funnel. So if I were to search for a solution, I'm going to connect more emotionally to someone who sounds like me. If someone's got a blog where they're like, here are the best shoes, if it's a listicle or something like that, best shoes for kids who play football, I'm going to read more into that. If they're saying, I'm a parent or I'm a guardian or whatever, my kid trashed their shoes, here's some shoes I found that last. And I'm going to connect with that. And I'm going to go, okay, I'll follow this through. And I know I'm being sold to. We're not daft. We understand that the purpose of this is we're reading a list of things and one of them's going to be best, and it's going to be best because it's sponsored or promoted or whatever else. But I'm going to trust it more than just a flat list of ideas or just a Google search, top of the thing of all these different things. It creates that connection and it gives me some trust. And then if, for example, I find the pair of shoes, go onto the product page, and the product page mentions kids playing football, hard wearing, all of those things. Again, it's going to follow down my journey and what my needs are and connect with me. And we're creating that all the way through, keeping the user in mind, keeping our, customer personas in mind, and telling the story for them. And you can do that really broadly. It doesn't have to be as specific as fed up parents with bad shoes, but you can do that really just as a for example. Doesn't mean that my son's recently trashed his shoes or anything.
No, definitely not.
But as a for example, that's the kind of thing you can do if you understand what story you're trying to tell. And you can even put your brand story in there and go, we invented these shoes because our kids trashed all their school shoes, or something else like that. Just something that connects with the person at the end that's more than just, these are really good shoes, buy them.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the customer journey there. And I know a lot of people are kind of moving away from the funnel kind of mentality, but I think it's still relevant. I think it is still something a lot of people need to be considering when you're discussing the different intents of people searching and thinking about whether, in a perfect example there of you looking for your son's brand new football boots, like, I don't know what the solution is. I don't even know what I'm looking for. So is it a different material? Is it a different thing? Is it a manufacturing method? They stitch it differently or whatever. Like, I have, as you can probably tell, have no idea how people make shoes, let alone football shoes. So going into that, you are top of funnel, you're in that research stage, you're in that initial stage. And I think telling a story where, exactly as you said, Amy, like, you guide the user and the customer through that journey. And I'm having this conversation a lot more with clients and even with guests on the podcast of that. I think there's a statistic of like people search 7 to 9 times before they actually click and buy a product. And it'll be various different stages, whether it's a research stage and then you're actually, now you know that, actually it is the material of the shoes that makes the difference. So you're then researching the different types of material. Does that person and does that site or that source of information have that specific information? And now you're telling the story of like, again, sticking with your example here, like, we invented this specific type of material that basically these shoes are indestructible. You could drive a car over them, they'll be fine. Like, there's nothing your kid can do to destroy these shoes, kind of thing. And I think that's a big thing I've been talking about, is having that answer to every question along the way, kind of thing, which I think is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as you say, the funnel stage the funnel model has its faults, because we know that's not how people work. It would be lovely if they did, but it's not. But I tend to think of it as a great way to sort of arrange my thinking when it comes into content and think, okay, so they're going to jump around and they're going to get right to the end and go back again and all of those things. But it's just a good way to piece these things together and go, okay, so I need these kind of content. I need these articles. I need these landing pages, and just arrange everything there so that when they do go on this very often circular journey, you have bits and pieces there that you can connect with them at those different stages. And it's, again, when it comes down to research, is you're thinking, okay, what channels does this particular person use? What's going to relate to them? Are they going to read a blog post? Are they actually that kind of person, or do I need to do something different? And making sense to the person reading it is really important.
Yeah, and you touched on something there I think is hugely important as well, of being where your audience is, where, again, something I talk to clients a lot about over the last sort of year or so is having a multimedia approach and a multi-platform, multi-channel approach to your marketing, where if you think that these are the kind of personas and kind of customers that will be searching on TikTok rather than on Google, or searching on YouTube, or looking at a particular forum or whatever it is, that there's so many different methods now for finding information. And I know there's a big debate about is TikTok a search engine? People are looking on there, so you may as well create content. You're going to get the views either way. And if your audience is active on there, then you should be in front of them, right? And adapting your story and understanding how that storytelling can relate to different people in different places. Like, I wouldn't necessarily have this same conversation as I'm having with you now as I would with a client, or with if I'm writing this down as an article of why you should do more storytelling in your SEO or whatever. Like, it wouldn't be the exact same way of doing it, but the principles and the structures and all that kind of stuff is still kind of like applied as a best practice kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. And this is where it comes down to, when you're putting together the story, is making sure that you know why you're telling it and what your key messaging is for it. So what's the point in saying this? What's the point in this whole thing? Is it to sell? Is it to subscribe? Is it to connect? Getting that down first for me. And I know people talk about the different, what's most important, is the messaging important, but I think it's always the purpose. Why are we shouldn't just create things for the sake of it. And this comes up in SEO a lot. Should we just create stuff so that we're hitting those keywords of, but is there a purpose to it? Is it important? Do you care about it realistically? Because if you're writing something just for the sake of writing it, it's no fun for anybody. And your audience is probably going to realize, they're probably going to know. So what's the point and what's the message? What are you trying to tell them? And it could be any number of things, but realistically, it's going to be connection or selling or subscribing or something like that. And then once you've got those down, then you can do the research into who your audience is, where they're going to be. Are they going to respond better, like you say, to a TikTok video? Do they need short form content like that? Or do they need something longer like a podcast? Or are they going to be the sort of person who needs to have it in front of them in an article? And a lot of it's guesswork, unfortunately. A lot of it is going to be just put it out as many places as you can and see what works, and then keep doing that. But where it comes down to the connection between analytics and creative, it is doing that research and then following it up and making sure that you're repeating what works, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of it.
Yeah, that is definitely something I've been doing as we've been creating more and more kind of video content here at Candour, especially now the podcast is on YouTube, and also like the audio version on Spotify and stuff like that. And then also taking little social clips and stuff like that and doing a 60-second, 30-second, 90-second, whatever it is, clip of Amy Doherty talking about the importance of storytelling and SEO, and that will be a little YouTube short or a TikTok or whatever. I will purposefully change. Try a 30-second clip this time. Try a 90-second clip this time. Try a different title. I don't know if you've noticed, listeners. I don't know how many anybody will, but the title will often be different on YouTube than it is on Spotify, because I am testing things and doing research and stuff like that. And I'm being conscious of that. And when I'm writing it up and putting it on the Candour blog, I might even be tempted to go for a different page title then. I tend to keep that similar because I'm then embedding the episode on the page and stuff. And I think you're still trying to tell that consistent story, but adapting your messaging and even sometimes the structure of your story, right? Starting in a different place of, if I'm looking for shoes and I'm, looking for indestructible shoes because I work on a construction site or whatever, that is a very different customer journey for you and your son, Amy, looking for shoes that are indestructible because he keeps trashing them at school. But the goal at the end of the day, I think you're spot on. I always lead with the purpose as well, is the same. You just might be starting in different places and reworking that messaging, shifting the story to a different audience in a different place, I think is something not enough of us do, and not enough of us have that kind of like bringing the analytics inside, which I think is a really great idea as well. That experimental side of things as well, right? Playing and testing and trying
Yeah,
different things.
that's it. And then it's so a lot of what I do day to day is campaign building. So it's coming up with an idea, coming up with this, the target audiences or whatever, and structuring and planning and justifying essentially why we should run that particular campaign. So the start of it is always what's the purpose, and then it's the message, audience, all of those bits and pieces like that. But there always has to be that level of structure there. And a lot of the times that helps you refine your message anyway. Is you might have a great idea of this is going to be, the headline, this is going to be the main point of it. And then once you've done your research, you're like, actually, that's probably not going to relate. That's probably going to sound strange or not match what they're expecting. So you go back and you refine it and you create it that way. And obviously there's lots and lots of different pieces you have to put together for it. But as long as you understand the purpose of it initially, you can go from there essentially.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something I've also learned when it comes to presentations and stuff as well, like having conversations with, whether it's internally and you're presenting to the directors or whatever it is, or externally to a client, or even doing a talk at a conference. The talks that I often resonate with, and maybe this is just my weird ADHD brain like kicking in and hyper analyzing stuff, but there's that element of like, oh, I can tell where this is going. I can see the process of this person. It doesn't feel like just a bunch of slides chucked up and, oh God, I've got 20 minutes. I better ramble through this. There is you start in one place and we end in a different place. There's a clear, story of that journey there. I love that in presentations. I find that really engaging.
So where we talk about stories and how they are, a lot of it is those same patterns repeating and what we're expecting and what we're ready for. And it's very comforting for us when we recognize something, and we recognize a part of a story or something is almost what we expect. And that's the point at which you can then put new information in or new details or expand on it. And you follow the same pattern, but you give new information during that. So if something's completely unexpected, sometimes people won't engage with it in the same way. But if it is, like you say, oh, I recognize this, I can guess where this is going, I can guess what points are going to be covered, that's actually a great place to give that new information or give new details, because someone is comfortable and ready to listen to it. And it's where, if we look at how we should lay out content, blog posts, web pages, long form, short form, it's meeting the expectation, which we say in SEO all the time. If somebody clicks on a link, the first thing they should see is what they're expecting to see. It should make sense. It should be logical. But at the same time, that's the next thing you do is give information. And that can be information they're expecting, or that can be new information. But it's that expectation, information, affirmation is the next one in that, which is, thank you for being here. It's great that you're here. You're in the right place. This is for you. And then the last point you can make in that is, sounds very cheesy, inspiration, which is the next thing they should do. So expectation, information, affirmation, and then inspiration, which is subscribe, which is buy, which is read more, which is take the next step. And all of those things follow one after the other, and they're all part of storytelling. They're all part of this nice narrative that people are expecting, but also leads on to something else for them.
Yeah, I love that idea of bringing that kind of like clear structure to it, and thinking about it from writer's perspective. You're going through almost like that act structure, right? That act 1, act 2, act 3. You want that big conclusion. You want that final thing. And I love that you brought up the, again, as cheesy as it sounds, the inspiration thing at the end there of like, what do you actually want me to do with this content? Like, what's the plan here? Am I just mindlessly reading a thing and then you're just left with more questions than answers? Or actually, no, here are related products, related other blog posts, other YouTube videos, whatever it is. If you haven't already checked this out, then I recommend you check this out. I do this on the podcast quite a lot. When it comes up in conversation, I'll say, oh, I already touched on this subject with a previous guest 6 episodes ago, blah, 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 blah. And as much as I'm obviously trying to get people to listen to more episodes of the podcast, it's the same as internal linking in my mind, right? Like when you're thinking about those CTAs or that little bit of, oh, in my conversation with Amy the other day, and I would link conversation with Amy, and then, oh, that links off to that episode of the blog post or that episode of a podcast or whatever it is. Having that little journey, you can kind of nudge people in the right direction. and not leaving them with like, cool, I've got my answer now, see you later.
Yep.
Sometimes
See ya,
that
bye.
is the right thing to do, but I think we tend to want to guide our customers and our users towards that final
Somewhere else.
destination, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things. If we go, when you talk about recipes before and sort of the apple pie, you know, I heard a wonderful phrase, granny died apple pie, which is where it's which is where it's all that backstory and then the apple pie recipe. So if that's something that you like, you will recognize that site again the next time you're looking for a recipe. And you might not look the same day, but you'll recognize it and you'll think, oh, okay, I trust this site. I'll go back. If you're someone like me who dislikes that kind of content, you'll see that URL come up in the search and go, oh no, I'm not slogging through that again. So it may not be the same day that inspiration comes in. It may not be the same week or month, but you've put a connection in their mind of this is good content, this is informative, this is helpful. And the next time they see you, whether that's organically or on socials or something else like that, they have that connection of this is worth my time, because we know the way that people use the internet is very fast. It's skim reading, there's clicking away, there's multiple tabs open at one point. So getting their attention and keeping it and giving them the idea that you're a valuable source of information or a valuable site or page or whatever to go to is so important, even if at that time it doesn't lead to a subscription or whatever else. It's that messaging in place, first of all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something, and when we think of like the double EAT side of things, we're thinking about content authoritativeness and trustworthiness and experience and expertise and bringing those all together. It can be as simple as having a story that relates to the user, that makes them feel heard. You're bringing in that experience side of things. I have also experienced the thing where the shoes fell apart after 2 wears and now I need to find new shoes. Like, what do I do? You're instantly relating to the user there. Then you'll talk about your first-hand experience. And then, oh, actually, I found the solution. You're bringing in your expertise and saying, turns out I was so frustrated with no shoes working at all that I invented a new shoe and I have created this new material or manufacturing process for these shoes. And then establishing yourself and building up yourself as an authority and proving that it works all ties into that. And I think a lot of people, as we said, half an hour ago, we were saying that, oh, it's kind of the checklist SEO kind of stuff. A lot of people see like experience, tick, right? Expertise, tick, authoritativeness, tick. And then you finally get the trust and you get the big tick, like lovely. But actually you can do that stuff really organically by telling an open and honest story and being relatable to your customers, to your users, to your audience, wherever they may be, and going through that process and establishing yourself as, oh, I really like this guy's writing style. I like this person's way of thinking, their way of doing it. Like, I follow writers from article to article, from book to book. I know I think I talked about this with Nate Matheson a few weeks ago when we were talking about how I got into the habit of following writers when I was working in comic books. This is part of my writing journey, writing comic books and reviewing comic books many years ago, 10 years ago now. And I've realized, like, oh, I don't need to read every single Batman story or Spider-Man story. That's actually not the bit I like. I actually like the writer who is writing this. So I'm going to follow Jack's next Batman story or Amy's next Spider-Man story because I really like that. And they've moved on to a different story or a different world or a different hero or whatever it is, but I can still relate to them and say, oh, I can see that I really like their style. And I find myself doing that with even people in SEO, thinking of people like Lily Ray or Barry Schwartz or whoever it is that does a lot of processes. Like Roger Monti is another person as well who I follow a lot, where they write up the news in a particular way or summarize it in a particular way. Some people can't stand the way I talk on a podcast, for example. Some people really relate to that and enjoy this kind of more conversational style. Do you find that doing that in your own life as well, Amy? Like following writers and following kind of that similar style?
Definitely. I think it's one of those things that's difficult, particularly if you're just starting out, for example, and you've only done the technical tick box side of things and you're just sort of starting to find your voice. It's very difficult to figure out what that is and how you can implement that for a variety of different people. And for some people, it's having the confidence to go, actually, I sound like this. Actually, this is how I like to write, because you will have to adapt. And again, definitely in the early stages, you'll find yourself doing all sorts of different tones and voices and styles because that's what's required. But as you go on, you'll find that actually you like to write like this, and people like it when you write like this or talk like this or things like that. And you can build your audience that way. And that's where the kind of people I follow who are successful at it have gone through that process of going, actually, this is how I like to write. If you don't like it, that's fine. That just means I'm not the person for you. And having that confidence to step up and go, this is what I do and how I do it. There are lots and lots of people doing it differently, but if this is what you're after, that's me. It's one of those things where once you've gotten into the swing of it, you can do that. And you can also learn from following people whose style that you like, and you'll sort of amass however many, depends on how ADHD you are, whether it's 5 or 50, but those kind of people whose voice and style that you like, and you'll learn from that and maybe adapt, or maybe think, oh, actually, I like it when they do this. Maybe that's something I can, what do they call it? They call magpie. I can magpie that idea and build that into my own content and my own ideas. It's without stealing. I can just be inspired, essentially, and go from there. So yeah, I think it's really worthwhile to find those kind of content producers that you really like, and maybe figure out what it is that you like about them. Is it their tone? Is it their cadence? Is it, what are they doing that you really resonate with, and sort of build a platform of people who inspire you or whatever else.
Yeah, definitely. I found that a lot through my journey as a podcaster, as a writer. Like, I've been podcasting and writing about the same amount of time, really. And it's this element of finding my voice and finding the way I present on camera to how I speak on the microphone. And I think it says a lot about the way that I do it, and my kind of process, from, like you said, taking inspiration from the people that I really admire, who were YouTube creators or film critics or whatever, podcasters back in the day, where I've taken inspiration from them. And I go for, basically, me on camera is me in real life. And I'm people I've met at Brighton, or have had, like, off camera, off mic chats with. They're like, oh, you're just the same as you are on the podcast. Like, yep, this is me. I'm swearing a lot less because I'm doing this as trying to be professional. But on my other podcast, I swear quite a lot. So it's like, I'm pretty much the same. You'll find me laughing, going on long tangents, doing silly things, doing jokes, whatever it is. And I find it really difficult to then, like, pull myself out of that voice and try and, like you said, oh, I need to write this super clean corporate thing. I have trained myself to do that through years and years of trying to be like, okay, don't sound too Jack here. Don't try and, now's the time to not make a joke. If you're writing for a charity thing, sometimes making a joke is the worst thing you can do. Sometimes it works and you can go for that kind of brand. I know we've had the recent kind of push of the chaotic social media stuff from, like, people like Ryanair and stuff, right, where they're just going like, oh wow, they said that on Twitter. That's a choice. But yeah, do you find yourself having to kind of like adapt your voice and adapt that style, but maintaining that core value and principle, right, as a thing you've learned throughout the years?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the things that's helped me along the way is just having my own style, having my own voice, which is I like to be clear, perhaps even a little bit blunt, but just people who work with me will know. But just having that same maintained, almost, not to sound too big, but core principles of how you like to present yourself and how you like to write, and just bringing that into things. And it helps as well because it helps you maintain consistency. And even if you do have to then go on to write something very corporate or something very chatty or friendly, you've still got those same elements that you can bring to it. And it just makes it much, much easier, because it can be so difficult to sort of code switch between multiple different styles. And if you're freelance or agency and you have a bunch of clients who are very, very different with different needs, creating content for those disparate styles is just going to send you loopy. So if you have a core, this is how I like to do it, and I'll just make sure I don't swear, or I don't make a joke, or I, include some adjectives where, world changing, all of that kind of thing. But as long as I do that, I know that the rest of the writing is going to be simpler for me. And yeah,
I think that's totally an interesting thing to kind of think about when you're adapting your voice. And I think it's something we've seen a lot more, especially as we shift towards a more creator focused, kind of, again, using horrible catchphrases here, creator focused media landscape. Like, ugh, gross. But like how we're seeing how much influence YouTubers have now, creating their own brands and creating their own entire companies. They're becoming CEOs of these tech startups, basically just because they have 5, 10, 100 million followers on whatever social media platform it is. But then you see brands partnering up with a particular influencer. I know, and again, no sponsors, no connections, whatever. I know Ridge Wallet have recently partnered up with Marcus Brownlee. And for those of you who don't know, Marcus is one of the biggest tech reviewers in the world. He is one of the most followed tech people on YouTube and social media and stuff. And having a brand literally bring him in as like a creative consultant. So he brings his voice and his style to it. He's always presented himself as a very, professional, very well educated in terms of knowledgeable about the products and stuff like that. He really does his research and understands what he's talking about. And if that is the kind of thing you want for your brand, perfect. You can then employ that and bring that influence and that element and that tone of voice to it as well, right? And I think there's so many opportunities there for the lowly people like us that are just working on clients and just writing new creatives or creating new campaigns, but then also the people with 100 million followers who are leading those campaigns and defining the tone of voice of an entire brand as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because these, the content creators like that are so disparate, and yet there's so many opportunities for them to connect with these brands and things. And it just shows that there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't one tone, there isn't one style. It will fit differently for different brands. And a lot of the time it does come down to the story that creator is presenting, that narrative that they have about themselves, and whether that resonates with a brand or a company or an organization, and whether it fits. And it can be, like I said, in the very early stages of getting into content writing and content creating, it's incredibly hard because you know that you can't do that. You do have to do the adaptations. You do have to temper the way that you write and things like that. But the more confident you get in almost putting a little bit of your story into things, the easier it becomes at that stage.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something I've really found when it comes to reporting for clients, which is something I've struggled with for the entire marketing career I've had, basically, is trying to make that seem interesting, where I'm well aware that 90% of clients just look at the front page or the initial dashboard or the summary, the executive summary, whatever it is, however you want to summarize it, and never look at the data, never look at the stats. Oh, there's 8 pages of graphs and stuff, and you can go and look at all the different beautiful graphs, and this one's blue, this one's green, this means that one's from Google Analytics, and this one's from Search Console. Who cares? Why would I care about blue graph number 17? Like, who cares? And for me, like, understanding that storytelling process for how to communicate a report to a client and make them care about it has been such a like eye-opening experience for me when it comes to having that initial, like, okay, here is the starting point of, like, here is the issue. You want more conversions, you want to sell more products on your e-commerce website. Well, here is the changes we've made. Here's how the rankings have affected that. Here's how those rankings have turned into clicks. How those clicks have turned into conversions. And it's super simple. Again, we were talking about the funnel earlier, right? And that super duper simple basic structure to it just transformed the way clients were engaging with my reports.
One of the things I like to do every now and then, when I'm sort of justifying a campaign or reporting on a campaign, is to create a user and see what they've done. So we use tools like Hotjar and bits and pieces like that, but Google Analytics as well, just to see how people are using the website or landing pages, where they've come from and where they went next. So did they come to us from social? Where did they go from there? And just one or two, because you can have all the data behind it, obviously, and present that. But having the ability to sort of show, your C-suite or your directors, whoever else you're dealing with, or your clients, this is how people behave during this campaign on these pages. This is a conversion that we had, for example, and this is how they got there. And just summarizing it like that, and then drilling into the data and going, this is what most people do. This is what people who convert do, all of those bits and pieces like that. But as I say, a lot of what I do with the campaign creation is talking it through with directors and also with sales, and just getting everybody's buy-in to it and creating that story of, here's the point of it, here's the user, here's all the messaging, here's what we expect them to do, and here's what will change if they don't do that. So giving them that narrative of, this is what's going to happen from here. And then when we're reporting on it, going, that didn't happen, or ideally that did happen, it was great, but occasionally that didn't happen, so we've tweaked this and we've done this, and creating more of a conversation around the data rather than just having those figures. And you will get, managers or directors who love the data. It happens. It's rare, but it happens. So you do need to have that behind it. But a lot of the time you are jumping in between something else that they're doing, and they just want the good news or what needs changing. So if you can present that up front with perhaps a user case study or something to say, this is what's happening, this is how people are using this campaign or this site, that just makes it a lot quicker. And you can, ideally, having a success story is always great. But otherwise, something like that builds that narrative around the data.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to kind of guide people through the process and not make everything feel so dry and disconnected, which I totally hold my hands up, have been thoroughly guilty of throughout my career, of making actually a big success story seem like not as much of a success story just by the way I communicated it, of like, oh yeah, everything has gone up by 400%, and that's the end of the sentence. Like, why? How did it go up? What went up? Where did it go up? What pages were succeeding? Is this from a particular campaign? All this kind of stuff of just like not actually giving people the full picture and guiding them through that. Because I think, like we said, and kind of bringing everything full circle here and kind of wrapping us up, that element of, this is a fundamental thing for us humans to process information. Verbal storytelling has been a thing for thousands and thousands of years for a reason. And again, ADHD brains maybe not great for remembering a lot of this stuff, but it doesn't have to be verbal. We're talking about written stuff. We're talking about transcripts for podcasts. We're talking about audio and YouTube and all this kind of stuff in so many different multimedia ways. Storytelling is important to the fundamental human experience, right? I think.
Yeah, essentially. And it's one of those things we can easily forget if we're bogged down in making sure everything's technically correct or, optimized or anything else like that. It's very, very easy to lose track of the fact that actually, if you were one-on-one trying to give this message to somebody, would it make any sense? Would it be interesting? Would it be engaging? Or have you overdone it on the technical side or the tick box kind of side of things and forgotten the purpose and the message behind what you're doing, which again sounds very not very analytically minded, but it is super important that you just keep those things in mind as you go through, and also do all your optimizations and things like that. But it is about communicating with people, and you can be as cynical as you like about, what people do in terms of marketing or products or selling. But realistically, the only way you're going to get anywhere is if you are communicating effectively and engaging with your audience.
Yeah, 100%. Couldn't agree more, mate. Couldn't agree more. So if people do want to follow you, Amy, and continue this discussion about storytelling and SEO, where can they go to find you on the internet?
So best place is my LinkedIn. I can't remember the link for it. The best place to find me
it will be in the show notes, don't worry.
Wonderful. So the best place to find me is going to be LinkedIn, which is in the show notes. That's where I'm generally found. I'm working in-house at the moment for fidelityfulfillment.com, which is, don't want to say at the moment. Can you cut that bit?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Go for that clean again.
Go for the beginning again. Sorry. Yeah. Don't want to get in trouble.
Funny enough, I've had other people say the name of the company and be like, oh, actually, shit, I shouldn't probably have said that. Like, okay.
No, it's fine. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My link is on the show notes if you want to have a chat or ask any questions or follow on from any of the points discussed. I'll be around and I'm best to find on there.
Nice. I think LinkedIn is really becoming the go-to place for us SEOs at the moment because of the whole chaos and storm that is Twitter and X or whatever we call it.
We've kind of run away. Yeah, we've run away very fast.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is definitely the place to be at the moment. And it seems to be a consistent kind of message from all of my guests this season. Has just been like, find me on LinkedIn because everywhere else is on fire right now. It's like,
yeah. Don't find me on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Amy. It's been a real pleasure
No worries, Jack.
finally sit down, chat with you, and discuss all things storytelling and SEO.
It's been great. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up episode 11 of season 3. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Amy for joining me and being a fantastic guest. I hope you very much enjoyed listening to the episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. I know there was a lot to talk about. I know we covered a lot of things. I put some links in the show notes and the description for a couple of things we mentioned throughout the episode as well. Some resources and some other talks and topics and things like that will hopefully get your creative ideas flowing about storytelling and marketing and all that kind of stuff. And of course, I'll be back next week with the fantastic Beth Woodcock. We'll be talking all about how to get into technical SEO without having a technical background. If you're looking to get into technical SEO, or if you want to learn about technical SEO in general and find some good resources, find some good books to read and all that kind of stuff, we are full of recommendations next week. Of course, I'll be back with Mark Williams-Cook back here in the studio in a couple of weeks at the end of March to do our monthly recap. We're talking all about the news that has happened in March, and I felt like I said this last month and I'm going to say it again. Feels like it's been a pretty eventful month. A lot of stuff's been going on. We're still talking about the helpful content update and the fallout from all of that and all of the changes that are happening at Google over the last few weeks. So stay tuned for that at the end of the month as well. Of course, I'll be back later in April with a bunch of fantastic guests as well. Lots of new topics, lots of new guests, and all that fun stuff coming up in April as well. So please do stay tuned and stick around for the rest of season 3 throughout 2024. Leading up to Brighton SEO and lots of other events going on later on in the year as well. Thank you so much for listening, and until next week, have a lovely week.